Jack Miller gripped the cold railing of the old bridge, staring at his reflection in the poisoned river below. The once blue water ran thick and dark, like the life drained from Rivertown. His hands, stained with grease, trembled slightly. Behind him, his loyal German shepherd, Buddy, sniffed the air, ears rising. A growl rumbled in Buddy's throat. Then he bolted down the pier, paws splashing through puddles. Jack followed, rain soaking his jacket, his limp more visible with every step. Under the broken dock, something caught the lightning's glare, a rusted metal box. Jack pried it open. Inside, a soaked ledger stamped Caldwell Chemical Company. His breath hitched. "So this is what killed our river," he muttered. Buddy barked sharply, as if to answer. Jack met his dog's eyes. "Guess we found ourselves a fight, huh, partner?" He didn't know it yet, but that night, a broken man, a faithful dog, and a dying river would ignite a miracle that brought light back to an entire town. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Chapter 1. The Wind Against the River. The wind moved through Rivertown like a restless ghost, carrying the smell of iron, oil, and a hint of rain. It was early autumn, the kind where the trees looked half alive and half ready to surrender. Down by the river, Jack Miller, 58 years old, hunched beneath the hood of a broken delivery van, his hands blackened with grease. His back ached, his knees protested, and yet he worked with the same precision as when he was young, when machines still spoke his language. Jack was the kind of man time had worn but never quite defeated. His face was carved with lines that told quiet stories: loss, long hours, stubborn pride. A week's worth of stubble covered his jaw, silver and dark, like ash on old coal. His hair, once chestnut, was now streaked gray, always flattened by the cap he wore even indoors. Once he'd been a senior mechanic at Rivertown Machinery Works, a plant that built and repaired ship engines. But the factory had shut down after the company relocated overseas. The word overseas tasted like betrayal. He'd given them 34 years. All he got back was a folded letter and an unpaid pension, under review. Now his world was smaller, a rusting pickup truck that coughed more than it ran, a toolbox that had seen more birthdays than he wanted to count, and Buddy, his 6-year-old German shepherd. Buddy was a solid dog, with a broad chest, dark saddle markings, and eyes that were too intelligent for comfort. His fur had dulled around the muzzle, but he moved with the quiet alertness of a soldier on patrol. Jack often said Buddy was the only supervisor he still respected. When they worked, Buddy sat nearby, tail flicking occasionally, as if inspecting every turn of the wrench. That morning, Jack was fixing an old air compressor for Sarah O'Donnell, owner of the corner general store, a narrow woman in her mid-40s with thin lips, a braid the color of wet straw, and a voice that could slice through the hum of traffic. She had inherited the shop from her father and carried herself like she was still fighting to earn it. "You're a lifesaver, Jack," she said, pressing a steaming cup of coffee into his hand. Her tone had that tired gratitude small-town people shared, knowing everyone was just barely holding on. "You hear they're cutting the power lines east of the bridge again?" Jack grunted. "Yeah, same story, cheaper this, cheaper that, until nothing's left to cheapen." He wiped his hands on a rag, looking out toward the river. The water was brownish gray, not the usual deep blue he remembered. An oily sheen glistened where the sunlight hit. Sarah followed his gaze. "Started a few weeks back," she murmured. "Fishers say the bass are dying near the docks. Some folks think it's runoff from the chemical plant." Jack frowned. "They still running that place at night?" "They shouldn't be," she said, shrugging. "But the guards talk about trucks coming through after midnight." Jack didn't answer, but the unease settled in his gut like an old injury waking up. Later that afternoon, he loaded his tools back into the truck. Buddy jumped into the passenger seat, paws on the dashboard, watching the world roll by. They stopped by the river for lunch, 2 sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, one for each of them. Jack sat on the hood, chewing slowly, staring at the sluggish current. Once this river had been the town's pride, fishing contests, kids swimming in summer, the kind of water that seemed to wash away hardship. Now it looked sick. The reflection of the factory smokestacks shimmered like bruises. "World's getting poisoned faster than I can fix it," Jack muttered. Buddy tilted his head, ears perked, as if to disagree. A sudden shout split the quiet. A small boy, maybe 10 or 11, was scrambling on the wet rocks near the embankment. His fishing pole slipped, and in trying to grab it, he lost his footing. Before Jack could react, Buddy launched himself off the hood, paws kicking up dirt. The splash came a second later. Jack's heart pounded. "Buddy!" he roared, running to the edge. The river wasn't deep, but the current near the drainage pipe was strong. The dog reached the boy just as he disappeared under the surface, gripping the kid's sleeve in his jaws, paddling furiously toward shore. Jack waded in waist-deep to grab both, pulling them onto the bank. The boy coughed, sputtering, his brown hair plastered across his face. Moments later, a woman came running down the path, slender, mid-30s, wearing jeans, a denim jacket, and a press badge clipped to her collar. Her dark curls framed a face both anxious and determined. "Leo!" she cried, kneeling beside the boy. Her name, as Jack soon learned, was Mia Torres, a local journalist for the Rivertown Chronicle, though her trembling hands and muddy knees made her look more like a mother than a reporter. "Thank God," she breathed, hugging her son tight before turning to Jack. I don't know how to thank you." Jack, dripping and gruff, shook his head. "Don't thank me. Thank him." Buddy stood beside them, tail wagging, water streaming from his coat like a hero pretending not to notice applause. Mia smiled through tears. "Well then, thank you, Officer Buddy." While Leo rested, Mia explained between breaths. She'd been investigating the plant's nighttime operations, trying to collect photos and data. "Locals keep reporting weird trucks at odd hours," she said. "They're probably dumping waste when nobody's watching." Jack raised a brow. "You sure about that?" "Not yet," she admitted, "but I'm close." Jack looked at the boy, who was staring into the river with quiet curiosity, the kind Jack recognized, one that belonged to those who still believed things could be fixed. When Mia offered to buy Jack dinner as thanks, he declined. "Just keep the kids safe," he said. But later that evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, he found himself driving past the factory anyway. The windows were dark, but faint lights flickered deep inside, like fireflies trapped in glass. He parked a distance away. Buddy growled low, hackles raised. "Yeah," Jack whispered. "I see it too." Something moved near the waterline. A shadow, maybe a man, dragging something heavy toward the river. Then the light cut out. Silence. Only the wind answered. Jack sat still, listening. Buddy's ears twitched. From across the water came a hollow clanging, metal against metal, rhythmic, deliberate. It was the sound of someone working in secret. Chapter 2. The Traveling Repair Shop and the Clue in the Rain. By the following week, Jack Miller had turned his old pickup into what he jokingly called Miller's Mobile Miracle Shop. The lettering was crooked, painted in red on a scrap of plywood tied to the truck bed with rope. Every morning he parked near the farmer's market or outside the laundromat, tools spread out on a tarp, hammers, pliers, extension cords, and the old blowtorch he trusted more than most people. He fixed whatever people brought, toasters, rusted hinges, cracked chairs, even a church bell rope once. The customers were mostly older folks who remembered him from his factory days. They'd drop a few dollars in his coffee can and talk while he worked, about the weather, the taxes, the way the town was dying slow. Buddy, always beside him, served as cashier, guard, and entertainment. Children would stop to pat his head while their parents bartered over repairs. Jack would scowl, pretending to dislike the attention, but his eyes softened whenever the dog wagged his tail. He wasn't making much money, but enough to eat and keep the truck fueled. More importantly, the work gave him purpose. In fixing broken things, he felt he could still fight the slow decay that had infected Rivertown. Each conversation added a nail to a larger pattern, rumors of late-night trucks rumbling past the chemical plant, of sick fish and burning throats after rain. The townsfolk had begun calling the strange smell ghost chlorine. Jack noticed the river's surface darkened after every storm, as if something invisible was bleeding into it. One cloudy afternoon, an older man approached, Frank Dillard, a retired dock worker in his 60s, tall but stooped, with hands like sandpaper and a gray beard streaked yellow from tobacco. Frank's overalls were patched, and his boots were older than some of the houses in town. "You're Jack Miller, ain't you?" he asked, squinting through smoke from a half-finished cigarette. "Used to fix turbines at Rivertown Works?" Jack nodded. "Yeah, before they decided foreign bolts were cheaper than local hands." Frank chuckled dryly. "I used to load barges down by Dock 7. Saw things I shouldn't have. Trucks that don't belong. They'd come in quiet, no headlights, unload barrels marked fertilizer. Fertilizer, my ass. You keep your nose clean, Miller. Them people don't like eyes on their business. The old man tapped his temple. Still dream of that smell sometimes, metal and bleach. He walked away before Jack could ask more. That night, the wind picked up, carrying the metallic tang Frank had described. Jack sat in his truck under the rattle of rain, Buddy asleep beside him, the dashboard light flickering like a heartbeat. He turned on the wipers, but the water came too fast. The world outside was a blur of gray. He should have gone home, or what passed for home, but something gnawed at him. The factory lights were visible across the river, faint glows behind the mist. He'd heard that tone in Frank's voice, the same low fear he'd heard from soldiers when he worked supply lines during his brief army stint in his 20s. People didn't invent that kind of fear, they remembered it. He started the engine, steering toward the industrial district. The rain thickened, the road curved past warehouses and a half-collapsed boathouse near the old pier, a place kids once used for fishing contests. Now it was just a carcass of wood and rust. Buddy whined, restless. Jack parked under a dead street lamp, grabbed his flashlight, and stepped out. The mud swallowed his boots. "Stay close," he muttered. The boathouse door creaked open under his push, the smell of rot and river mold heavy in the air. Inside, the floorboards groaned, echoing every step. Buddy's ears shot up. He moved toward the far corner, sniffing, pawing at a loose plank. Jack crouched beside him, running his light over the spot. Something metallic reflected between the cracks. He pried up the board with a crowbar, revealing a roll of damp papers bound by twine. They were water-stained but legible. Shipping logs, delivery notes stamped with the Caldwell Chemical Company seal. Each page listed dates, barrel counts, and destinations, most marked "Night Shift, Confidential." His pulse quickened. "Buddy, what the hell did we just find?" The dog barked once, as if answering. Jack laid the papers out on an overturned crate, snapping photos with his old flip phone, the flash illuminating the dark like gunfire. Then came a sound outside, tires grinding over gravel. Jack froze. Buddy stiffened, growling low. Through a crack in the wall, headlights swept across the riverbank. A truck, large and white, pulled up near the drainage ditch. Two men stepped out, silhouettes under the rain. One wore a hooded slicker, the other carried a clipboard, his posture sharp and impatient. They spoke briefly. Jack couldn't make out the words, but he saw one of them toss something heavy into the water. A splash, a hollow echo, then silence. The truck idled, reversed, and disappeared into the storm. Jack let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Looks like Frank wasn't lying. Buddy nudged the papers with his paw, leaving a muddy print across one of the pages, right beside a signature block. Jack couldn't help but grin despite the tension. "Guess you're signing off the report, huh?" he whispered. He rolled the documents back up, stuffed them in a plastic bag, and hurried out. The rain hammered harder now, washing mud into the river like blood from a wound. When they finally got back to the truck, Jack sat behind the wheel, soaked through, heart pounding. He replayed what he had seen again and again. The men, the splash, the glowing truck logo. Caldwell Chemical. He'd fixed their engines once, years ago. He remembered their foreman, a sharp-dressed man named Allen. Price, who always wore gold cufflinks and called everyone pal in that oily way people use when they're hiding something. Price had been the type who smiled too wide and talked too fast. A man who thought danger was just another thing you could pay to make disappear. If Price was still around, he'd know exactly what those barrels were. Jack turned to Buddy, who was shaking off rainwater onto the passenger seat. "Well, partner," he muttered, "looks like we just stepped in something big." The dog blinked, tongue lolling slightly, as if unfazed by conspiracy or storm. Jack laughed, tired but alive. Outside, lightning forked across the river, revealing the reflection of the factory's dark windows, and for just a heartbeat, a figure standing near the opposite shore, watching them. When Jack looked again, the figure was gone. Only the ripples remained. Chapter 3. The blowback and the fall. The morning after the storm, the town felt uneasy, like a wound wrapped too tightly. Jack parked his truck outside Sarah's general store, planning to restock nails and batteries. But the looks he got were different. Too long, too quiet. He noticed people whispering behind coffee cups, faces he'd known for years turning slightly away. Even Sarah, who usually greeted him with her sharp-tongued cheer, only nodded and said softly, "You okay, Jack?" He frowned. "Why wouldn't I be?" She hesitated, twisting her wedding ring absent-mindedly, a nervous habit from the husband who'd left her 10 years ago. "There's talk going round. Folks saying you stole metal from the factory last night. Said they saw your truck near the plant. Jack's heart clenched. That's a lie. I know, she said gently, but people talk, especially when someone tells them to. By afternoon, the rumor had grown legs. Someone had called the sheriff's office. Anonymous tip. They came, 2 deputies in khaki uniforms, polite but cold, asking questions that felt rehearsed. One, Deputy Carl Henson, was a heavy-set man in his 40s with a thick mustache and tired eyes. He'd grown up in Rivertown but long ago learned to bend his morals when the paycheck came from City Hall. Nothing personal, Jack, he muttered, scratching his neck. Just need to check your inventory. Jack watched them poke around his truck, open his toolbox, lift the tarp. They found nothing. But that didn't stop the whispers. By sunset, his landlord, a short, balding man named Mr. Gaines, whose belly strained against his suspenders, showed up at the motel room Jack rented by the week. Jack, he said, voice uneasy but firm, I've got the county inspector coming through tomorrow. Don't want no trouble. Maybe it's best you find another place. Jack stared at him, disbelieving. You know I didn't do anything. Gaines avoided his eyes. I know, but knowing ain't paying my mortgage. I'm sorry. The man shuffled away, guilt weighing down his steps. That night, as Jack loaded his few belongings into the truck, Buddy whined softly beside him. Don't look at me like that, Jack said, trying for humor, but failing. You still got your bed in the back seat, right? Buddy licked his hand, tail wagging once, a soldier's reassurance. They drove until the lights of town faded into the rearview mirror, pulling over by the riverbank where the gravel met the mud. It was cold, the kind that crept into your bones and stayed there. Jack built a small fire in an old paint can and sat watching it, the flicker reflected in his tired eyes. The next morning, when he returned to his repair spot, he froze. The sign, his crooked red-painted mobile miracle shop, was torn in half. His tarp was slashed, tools scattered and kicked into the mud. Someone had dumped oil across his workbench. Buddy sniffed the mess, ears flattening. Then he barked sharply, staring toward the alley. Jack turned just in time to see a man disappearing around the corner, wearing a Caldwell chemical security jacket. He chased a few steps but stopped, pointless. Whoever it was, they wanted him scared, silenced. Rage burned hot, then quickly turned to exhaustion. Jack knelt in the mud, collecting wrenches with trembling hands. Buddy nudged him, whining. It's just tools, Jack muttered, but his voice cracked. These weren't just tools. They were pieces of his life, the last relics of usefulness. When Buddy barked again, Jack looked up to see the dog bleeding from a shallow cut above his eye. He must have stepped between Jack and whoever swung that crowbar. Damn it, boy, Jack whispered, wrapping a strip of his flannel sleeve around the wound. You always gotta play hero? Buddy just panted, leaning into him, warm and steady. He sat there for a long time, staring at the ruined workbench. A part of him wanted to quit, to sell the last of his gear and drive until he ran out of gas or reason. He imagined disappearing into some nameless county where nobody whispered his name. But then he remembered the papers he'd hidden in the glove box, the shipping logs, Buddy's muddy paw print sealing them like fate. That was why this was happening. They were scared. Fear meant proof. Night came early. Rain threatened again, drumming faintly on the roof of the truck. Jack was about to doze off when he heard a soft tap on the window. He tensed, but it wasn't danger. It was Leo, the boy Buddy had saved, clutching a soggy paper bag. His hair was damp from drizzle, cheeks flushed from the cold. Mom said you might be hungry, he said, setting the bag on Jack's lap. Inside was a sandwich, 2 cookies, and a note written in crayon. For Jack and Buddy. From the River Kids Fund. Jack blinked. The what? Leo grinned sheepishly. Me and the other kids from the docks made it up. Miss Sarah gave us a jar for donations. We got $9.20, Buddy barked softly, tail thumping. Also, Leo continued proudly, we made this. From his pocket, he pulled a strip of blue ribbon and tied it clumsily around Buddy's neck. It's a lucky charm for heroes. For a moment, Jack couldn't speak. He felt something heavy lift inside him, not gone, but lighter, like rust finally breaking loose. He tousled Leo's hair. Thanks, kid. Leo beamed, then added, Mom says don't give up. She's working on something. Before Jack could ask what, the boy ran off into the drizzle, disappearing down the dirt road. Later, as Jack sat under the faint glow of his fire, Buddy gnawed on half the sandwich and, true to form, tried to eat the ribbon too. "Hey," Jack laughed, pulling it free. "You ruined that, and I'll have to pay $9 to replace it." Buddy tilted his head, eyes bright, as if saying he'd pay double. Jack leaned back, feeling the ache in his ribs, the warmth of the fire, and, strangely, the first flicker of hope since everything began. Somewhere beyond the river, a siren wailed faintly, but, for the first time, Jack didn't feel afraid. He had no house, no steady income, and enemies in expensive suits. But he wasn't alone. He had a town that still remembered kindness, a boy who believed in heroes, and a dog who refused to quit. In that fragile moment, beneath the whisper of wind and rain, Jack Miller began to believe maybe, just maybe, things could still be fixed. Chapter 4. The Hearing by the River. The town hall of Rivertown hadn't seen this many people in years. Wooden benches creaked under the weight of farmers, mechanics, and shopkeepers. The air was thick with humidity and anticipation, the faint scent of river mud drifting through the open windows. On the stage, the old flag of the town hung unevenly, one corner pinned with tape. Behind the long oak table sat 3 council members, faces lined with fatigue and politics. At the center of it all stood Mia Torres, her notebook clutched to her chest, the very image of courage wrapped in denim and nerves. She'd gathered everything: photos, logs, testimonies. Weeks of risk and persistence had led to this. Her dark curls framed a face too young for the weight she carried, but her voice, steady, low, and deliberate, cut through the murmurs. "The people of Rivertown deserve to know what's been poured into their water," she said, "and who's responsible." Jack sat in the second row, Buddy curled obediently at his boots, head resting between his paws. The dog's wound had healed into a faint scar above one eye, a mark of loyalty more than pain. Jack wore his cleanest flannel and the same battered cap he'd had since the factory days. His fingers fidgeted with a wrench in his pocket, an old habit when nerves tightened his chest. He wasn't one for crowds or speeches, but Mia had asked him to come, and he figured the least he could do was stand by her. On the other side of the room sat the men from Caldwell Chemical, 3 of them, in polished suits that didn't belong in Rivertown. At their center was Alan Price, the same man Jack remembered from the factory years ago. Price was in his mid-50s now, trim and manicured, with silver hair slicked back and a gold watch gleaming under the lights. His tan looked bought from a salon, and his smile was the same as ever, wide, confident, hollow. He was the kind of man who called everyone friend while checking for knives behind his back. When the town's community lawyer, Ellen Baker, stood up to present the evidence, the room quieted. Ellen was a woman in her early 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, her auburn hair tied into a neat bun. Her glasses gave her an air of stern intelligence, and her voice had the steady rhythm of someone who had fought long odds before. She had been a factory kid once herself. Her father lost his job in the first wave of layoffs years ago. That memory still burned in her, turning her calm demeanor into something fierce when she spoke of justice. "The company claims compliance," she said, gesturing to the papers on the table. "But these logs, photographed by Mr. Miller, show shipments that never appeared in official records. These barrels didn't vanish. They were dumped." Price rose slowly, adjusting his cufflinks as though the outcome were already his. "With all due respect, these photographs prove nothing. Anyone could have forged that. Paperwork. We've checked our storage. There's no original ledger. Perhaps someone misplaced it." His smirk landed directly on Jack. The room erupted in murmurs. Jack's jaw tightened. He felt the wrench in his pocket press against his palm like a heartbeat. Buddy stirred, ears twitching. The dog's nose lifted suddenly, nostrils flaring. He let out a quiet whine, then a sharp bark that echoed off the hall's rafters. "Buddy, easy," Jack whispered, but the shepherd pulled toward the door, straining the leash. The dog wasn't anxious. He was tracking something. Jack followed, confusion turning to curiosity. Outside, the one carried that same faint metallic tang, the smell of the river after the rains. Buddy led him down the side path toward the old port warehouse, abandoned for years, now fenced off and forgotten. They reached the door. The dog scratched at a section of wall near the corner, whining insistently. Jack shone his flashlight over the warped boards, noticing a patch where the paint looked newer. He pried it open with his wrench, revealing a hollow space inside the wall. From it, he pulled a small metal box coated in dust and spider webs. Inside lay a thick, water-stained ledger with Caldwell's embossed logo. Each page bore signatures, dates, and coordinates, the same nights Mia had documented, the same times Jack had photographed. He exhaled, half in disbelief. "You clever mutt," he said, patting Buddy's head. When they returned, the hearing was still in full swing. Mia was holding her ground against Price's evasions, though the fatigue showed in her voice. Jack strode up the aisle, the box in his hands. The room hushed. He set it down on the table with a heavy thud. "Looking for this?" he said simply. Price's smirk faltered. Ellen opened the ledger carefully, eyes scanning the pages. "These are sealed entries," she murmured, pointing at the raised company stamp. "They're real, and they match the photos." Murmurs turned into gasps, then into applause. Price's complexion drained of color. He sputtered something about unauthorized access and legal counsel, but the tide had turned. Ellen's voice rose calm and firm. "Caldwell Chemical is hereby found in violation of state environmental law. The company will pay damages, restore the river, and contribute to the Rivertown Trade Scholarship Fund. Case adjourned." Her gavel came down like a hammer on an anvil. As the crowd erupted in cheers, Mia turned to Jack, smiling through tears. "You did it," she whispered. Jack shook his head. "No," he said softly, looking down at Buddy, who was wagging his tail proudly. "We did." Reporters from nearby counties began snapping photos. Leo ran up, waving a blue ribbon in his hand, shouting, "He's the hero dog again." Jack crouched to tie it once more around Buddy's neck. "Guess it worked the first time," he muttered. The crowd laughed. For the first time in months. The laughter didn't sound forced. It sounded like life returning. As the townsfolk poured out of the hall, Jack walked toward the riverbank. The evening sun broke through the clouds, reflecting gold on the surface that once ran black. The wind shifted, no longer bitter but soft, carrying the smell of clean water. Jack watched the ripples, his face calm, lined, but peaceful. The battle had been ugly, but maybe, just maybe, the river could heal. Chapter 5. The Light's Return and the Warm Ending. Spring came late to Rivertown that year, but when it arrived, it came all at once. The trees along the river burst into green, and the water, once dull and poisoned, now caught the morning sun like a sheet of glass. The smell of iron and decay was gone, replaced by the scent of wet earth and wildflowers. On the bank stood a new building, fresh painted wood, wide windows, and a sign that read, "Rivertown Repair and Rescue Workshop." It wasn't grand, but it was alive. The laughter of apprentices, the hiss of welding torches, and the rhythmic tapping of hammers filled the air like a heartbeat. At the center of it all was Jack Miller, sleeves rolled up, safety goggles perched on his cap. His hair had gone more silver since the hearing, but his back was straighter, his step lighter. There was a quiet dignity about him now, the kind of calm earned through storms survived. He looked less like a man worn by life and more like one welded back together. "Steady hands, Leo," he said to a lanky 13-year-old balancing a wrench twice his size. Leo Torres had shot up in the past months, his face longer, his freckles darker from sun. He was quick, curious, and reckless in the way only a boy with hope could be. Jack's gruffness was wasted on him. Leo saw right through it. "Yes, sir," Leo grinned, tongue peeking between his teeth as he tightened a bolt. Behind them, Buddy lay near the doorway, tail thumping lazily, his blue ribbon freshly washed and tied like a badge of honor. Age had added a few white hairs to his muzzle, but his eyes gleamed with unbent loyalty. He was the workshop's official safety supervisor, and he took the title seriously. Whenever the lunch bell rang, Buddy barked twice, always at perfect timing, earning applause and laughter from the crew. It had become a ritual, Rivertown's new anthem. Mia Torres was there too, dressed in jeans and a white shirt rolled at the sleeves, clipboard in hand. Her small science lab had been set up in the back room, a gift from the scholarship fund. She tested river samples, trained students in basic chemistry, and wrote for the Rivertown Chronicle, though now her articles carried headlines like "The River Reborn" instead of "Who's Poisoning Our Water." She had changed too. The worry lines on her face had softened, replaced by the kind of strength that doesn't shout. Her laughter came easier now. The town had changed alongside them. The once abandoned docks now hosted a weekend market. Fishermen had returned, their boats bobbing like old friends. The factory's ruined warehouses were being renovated into training halls for young mechanics, all funded by the court's order, though everyone knew who had truly earned it. Even Mayor Duncan Hale, a plump man with thinning blonde hair and a fondness for grand speeches, was there to take credit, though his tie barely covered his belly and his words tripped over themselves. "A shining example," he declared, voice booming through a cheap microphone, "of how industry and community can coexist." Jack stood beside Mia, trying not to roll his eyes. "You think he even remembers the trial?" he muttered. Mia smirked. "He remembers the check." In the mayor's hands was a comically large ceremonial check from Caldwell Chemical, the company now under new management. The logo gleamed, freshly redesigned, as if a new coat of paint could wash away guilt. The crowd clapped politely, but all eyes were on Jack and Buddy. When the mayor tried to hand the check to Jack, Buddy sniffed it suspiciously, then promptly turned toward the catering table and snatched a hot dog right off a plate. The crowd roared with laughter. "Buddy!" Jack barked, but even he couldn't help chuckling. The mayor froze mid-sentence as Buddy strutted off proudly with his prize, tail wagging, mustard on his nose. "Guess he's collecting his share," Mia teased. For a long while, laughter filled the square, real, belly-deep laughter, the kind that had been missing for years. Children played near the edge of the pier, fishermen waved from boats, and the air hummed with renewal. The suns dipped low, setting the river aglow in bands of gold. That evening, after the crowd dispersed, Jack stood alone by the river. The workshop lights flickered behind him, reflecting on the calm water like a trail of stars. Buddy sat beside him, chewing contentedly on the last bit of hot dog. Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. His late wife, Helen, smiling beneath a sycamore tree, grease smudged on her cheek from helping him fix their first car. Her eyes seemed to sparkle even in the faded ink. "You'd laugh if you saw me now," he murmured. "A teacher, of all things. But I think I finally tightened that loose bolt, didn't I?" He smiled faintly, slipping the photo back into his jacket. Mia called from the doorway. "Jack, we're lighting the lanterns." He turned to see her and Leo releasing paper lanterns into the twilight sky, each glowing softly as it rose. The townsfolk followed, sending dozens more into the air. Small suns floating upward, carrying wishes for the river, for the town, for tomorrow. Buddy barked once, watching them rise. Jack lifted one himself, its thin paper trembling in his rough hands. "For her," he said quietly. When he released it, the lantern drifted above the river, joining the others, its light reflected in the clear water below. For a moment, everything was still, the town, the river, even the wind, as if Rivertown itself had stopped to breathe again. And as the first stars appeared above, Jack rested his hand on Buddy's head. "We did good, didn't we, boy?" The dog leaned against him, a low, contented rumble in his chest. The lights shimmered across the river like promises kept. Sometimes God doesn't part seas or send thunder to show his power. Sometimes his miracles come quietly, in the hands of a mechanic tightening a loose bolt, in a loyal dog guarding what's right, in a small town that refuses to give up on itself. Rivertown's river wasn't just cleansed by laws or machines. It was healed by faith, by love, by ordinary people who kept showing up even when the light seemed gone. And maybe that's the truest miracle of all, that when we choose kindness, when we fight for what's right, when we care for one another, we become his hands at work. So if this story touched your heart, share it. Leave a comment about someone who once helped you tighten the loose bolts in your life. Subscribe to join our growing circle of hope, where faith meets everyday courage. And tonight, before you rest, whisper a prayer for every Jack, every Buddy, and every small town still waiting for its river to shine again. May God bless you and keep your light steady, no matter how dark the water seems.